The movie begins in the year 1937 at Kyoto, Japan. Lieutenant Commander Edwin T. Layton attends a dinner at a state function, along with the British and Japanese empires. Following the dinner, Lieutenant Commander Layton meets with Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto expresses to Layton how Japan is eager to become a world power, along the lines of the US and China. But with 80% of Japan's oil supply coming from the US, Yamamoto warns Layton that they will be forced to take drastic measure if their oil supply is to be compromised. 4 years go by, and on December 7, 1941, the Second World War is raging on. The United States of America has remained neutral up until this point, as the USS Enterprise conducts a scouting mission just over 1,000 miles away of Pearl Harbor. A pilot by the name of Dick Best, with his radio man James Murray, pull a reckless stunt during a routine exercise by landing their plane without the flaps, and the engine switches off, causing them a rocky landing on the ship deck. Dickinson, a friend of Best, informs Best that their superior officer, Wade McCluskey, is not pleased by their action. He then introduces him to Miller and tells Best to go easy on him, as it's Miller's last Navy duty, and being the only radio man in his class who hasn't crashed. Meanwhile, on the USS Arizona stationed at Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Roy Pierce is setting up for church service with the rookies. All of a sudden, Japanese airships fly in and launch a surprise attack, bombing the ships docked at the location. Best's wife Anne and daughter Barbara notice the attack from their backyard. Layton gets a call alerting him of the attack. Concurrently, Dickinson with his radio man Miller are on a scouting mission near the station of Pearl Harbor when they too get attacked by the Japanese airships, causing Miller to die, but Dickinson makes it out as their plane crashes. Back at USS Arizona, Pierce helps the young men move across to a safer boat while he stays behind to shoot the Japanese fleets, but eventually dies from the explosion of the Arizona. The news of the attack soon reaches the USS Enterprise, as Admiral William Halsey and his crew try to navigate the location of the Japanese carrier to launch a counterattack. They fail by mistaking the location of the Japanese at the south when they are located at north. After the attack is over, the USS Enterprise arrives at Pearl Harbor, witnessing the immense and devastating damage done by the Japanese. As bodies are recovered from the water, Best goes to find Paris's body, who was his roommate and old friend. Hoping to find Pierce alive, he discovers Pierce's body burnt beyond recognition. Best only identifies him with his watch and a class ring and retrieves them for his wife. Following this, the United States of America officially declares war against Japan, entering World War II. In Japan, Yamamoto meets with Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi and gets informed that Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo did not follow the advice of commanding the destruction of the oil tanks of American aircraft carriers as to cause a detrimental loss for America. With this mistake done, they then proceed to propose the plan to target the aircraft carriers next. Concurrently in America, Admiral Chester Nimitz arrives in Washington to receive the order from the President as the newly assigned commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet and to oversee the war. Concurrently, after Roy Pierce's funeral, Best joins his fellow soldiers at a bar to raise a toast to Pierce's memory. Afterwards, Best and Dickinson leave the bar and notice the Admiral Nimitz's car passing by them. After Nimitz arrives at his office, Layton greets him and requests to be reassigned to a destroyer, but Nimitz realizes his skill as an intelligence officer despite his failure to warn the superiors in time prior to the attack. Nimitz then orders him to predict Yamamoto's next move as his first assignment, as he plans to send Admiral Halsey to invade Marshall Islands and needs the assurance that it's not a trap. On February 1st of 1942, McCluskey's men fly into the islands, whereas William Halsey's men take on the Japanese from the seas. Attacking the aircraft and ships of the enemy, the battle intensifies as both sides land heavy strikes. The Japanese artillery capably advances through the strikes as a torpedo from the Americans poorly hits the Japanese ship. Best notices a runway full of bombers from the air, engaging a successful attack bombing the airfield and skillfully escaping the enemies chasing him. After the invasion, the soldiers go back to the USS Enterprise and suddenly get an attack from the Japanese planes in retaliation and almost destroy their ships. Fortunately, a machinist named Bruno Gaido manages to successfully shoot down a Japanese plane deliberately, trying to crash into their ship, and as a result, fails to do so and crashes in the ocean instead. The bravery of Bruno earned him respect from Halsey, and a promotion to first-class aviation machinist. Afterwards, Best with his wife, Anne, attends an officers' club party in Hawaii. Anne meets Dickinson and McCluskey. While Best goes to get them some drinks, Anne then confronts McCluskey by asking why her husband, Best, is not in command of any squadron, to which McCluskey replies that he is not in power to make those decisions, and further states that the reckless attitude of Best does not necessarily fit the position to lead. Meanwhile, Leighton meets Best at the bar, and Best praises Leighton as the fleet intelligence and states the need for someone as smart as him following the incident at Pearl Harbor. Best then returns to the table and asks Anne to dance before they call it a night and leave the party. On April 18, 1942, at 650 miles east of Japan, a month after the invasion of the Marshall Islands, Best is interrupted by Dickinson. While in the middle of briefing new pilot recruits in the USS Enterprise, they see a group of Army bombers aboard a carrier near them. Upon receiving the order to launch a bomb attack on Tokyo, the capital of Japan, with a plan to land on China, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, the commander of the Army bombers, with his crew heads out to air raid the city. After successfully bombing Tokyo, Doolittle and his crew find themselves running out of oil, thus bailing out of their plane. Doolittle ends up landing in a Japanese-occupied territory in China, but gets surrounded by armed civilians. Luckily, a Chinese schoolteacher comes to the scene to help translate, and after some convincing that he is an American military pilot, hence proving himself an ally for bombing Tokyo, the Chinese civilians and guerrillas congratulate him for striking a blow against Japan, and they escort him to Kuzhou. On their way to Kuzhou, Japanese fighter planes suddenly attack the village where Doolittle is, killing a number of civilians in the process, revealing the tragic situation of China under the hands of the Japanese. Meanwhile, at Hiroshima Bay, Yamamoto is despondent at allowing such a brazen attack penetrating Tokyo, putting the life of the Emperor of Japan at risk. But his spirits are lifted upon hearing that the incident has convinced the alarmed Japanese government to finally proceed with his plan to take Midway after finishing the initial operation at Coral Sea. Back at Pearl Harbor, Leighton informs Nimitz that cryptanalyst Joseph Rochefort has picked up a message that indicates the Japanese are moving towards the Coral Sea, targeting something referred to as AF. Nimitz immediately sends a secure message to Halsey, ordering them to join Yorktown and Lexington at Coral Sea as soon as possible. Leighton then states a theory about Japan preparing for a major target to an unknown area, but Nimitz insists that Leighton finds out the exact target first. The USS Enterprise under the command of Halsey arrives at Coral Sea 24 hours late, leaving them and the Hornet as the only carriers in the Pacific. Halsey meets with McCluskey and Best to reassign them to different positions. McCluskey is now tasked to take charge of the pilots and a dive bomber, while Best is promoted as a leader of a bombing squadron. Yamamoto enters a war room, where Nagumo and the other Japanese officers are having a dispute on two different ways of their attack at Midway. One scenario suggests the possibility of Americans already anticipating their attack, thus taking their carriers down to their advantage. On the contrary, the other scenario states that the Americans are unaware of their attack, hence giving them time to retreat since the enemy will be coming from Pearl Harbor. Yamamoto then advises them to reset the simulation by suggesting that the American carriers must come from Pearl Harbor. At the Pearl Harbor, Nimitz receives a call informing Leighton that the Washington intelligence thinks he is wrong about his theory and that the USS Enterprise should remain at Coral Sea, but Leighton argues that the next target will be their base Midway. After the reasonable dispute of Leighton, Nimitz decides to visit the station of naval intelligence, where he personally meets the cryptanalyst, Joseph Rochefort, who Leighton describes to be very particular in doing his job. Rochefort explains that they believe AF is a code name for Midway, and contrary to Washington's belief that the Japanese are targeting a location in the South Pacific, they think they are planning to attack there in a matter of weeks. Eventually, by Leighton and Rochefort's persistence, Nimitz believes them but orders them to try and convince the Washington intelligence with this information. To do so, Leighton secretly arranges the Midway base to broadcast an uncoded radio message saying their water treatment systems have malfunctioned. Sure enough, Leighton's codebreakers intercept a Japanese coded message saying AF is having water problems. Leighton then passes that clear information of Japan's target to Nimitz. Best briefs his team for training after dismissing them. A rookie comes up to him saying that he's not confident to fly, but Best motivates him and assigns him as his wingman. As Best training the rookies to fly, Best realizes that the conditions for takeoffs from the carrier prove dangerously poor, and he is barely able to ascend into the air. He tries signaling a message to abort the others from flying after him, but due to a miscommunication, his wingman falls to the sea and gets hit by the ship, instantly killing him. On the following day, Nimitz visits Halsey and sees his terrible rash condition, thus ordering him to return to Pearl and get medical treatment. He is shortly replaced by Admiral Spruance. As the war grows near, Nimitz USS Yorktown to be fixed within 72 hours for the battle. He then meets with other high-ranking officials, along with Leighton, to place a trap at the northeast Midway, and as the officials are hesitant with the estimation of the position of the Japanese, Leighton reassures them by stating the exact place and time they are expecting the attack. McCluskey with Best and a few other officers discuss the upcoming battle. Shortly after, Best approaches McCluskey, asking for advice on how to lead his men, given the incident with the young rookie, to which McCluskey replies to just make them ready for tomorrow's battle and bring as many of them back alive. Dickinson interrupts them by informing a ship's sighting near them, which turns out to be USS Yorktown, boosting their confidence for the battle ahead. On the morning of June 4, 1942, the Japanese launch their attack on Midway. Momentarily, the American aircraft retaliates successfully by spotting the exact location of the Japanese carriers. Although they come prepared, it still isn't enough to destroy the Japanese ships. As the planes of USS Enterprise prepare for takeoff, a Japanese scouting plane spots them, revealing their location to the commander of the Japanese fleet. This forces them to change their plan and instead attack the American carrier, avoiding the trap set by Nimitz. Afterwards, a USS Nautilus submarine launches a torpedo at a Japanese carrier but misses. Meanwhile, the USS Enterprise squadrons finally take off. While on air, McCluskey and his men have a hard time spotting any Japanese carriers, thus thinking they change their course. Moments later, McCluskey notices a Japanese ship trailing alone and decides to lead his squad to its direction. Best follows McCluskey, and when they finally locate the Japanese carriers, they begin attacking. McCluskey tries to dive bomb a carrier but misses. On the other hand, Best and Dickinson successfully destroy 3 carriers out of 4 and luckily escape unharmed. Afterwards, Yamamoto is informed of the 3 carriers destroyed by the American planes. Yamamoto figures that the Americans are aware of their plan to attack Midway. After the encounter with the Japanese fleet, the USS Enterprise squadrons return to their ship, but after some time, Best along with his men return to attack again. This time he successfully bombs the remaining carriers, completing his revenge for Pearl Harbor. Later that day, the Americans finally conclude the battle and decide to get back to their ships. But Murray and Murray have not yet returned. After some time, Best returns safe just in time before his plane runs out of fuel. At night, the Japanese commanders decide to take down their remaining carriers, not to be used by the Americans, and Yamamoto orders to officially retreat and accept their loss, assuring the victory of the Americans in their epic battle against them. The movie ends by showing the real-life characters portrayed in the movie and the accomplishments they had during and after the war. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.